Man, and then there's land. One does not supersede the other, basically. Like we are here because of the land. The land teaches us.
There are alternatives already in our midst, but they're just we can't realize them. Communities cannot enact them because of the fact that these lands are occupied.
We need food. We need water. We need housing. We need education. We need proper environmental support.
The U.S. military controls 21% of the land area of Oahu. Since 1898, the Hawaiian Islands have been ruled by a system of military security, following an illegal annexation to protect American planters from global trade. In the past century, Hawaii has seen unprecedented development of military infrastructure alongside continuous discharge of explosives and industrial waste on the archipelago. Combine that with excessive leaseholding, chemical pollution, and an ever-present risk of attack, and Oahu can start to feel quite uneasy for its residents. In response, the Hawaiian sovereignty movement mobilized, serving as a microcosm of global power struggles between indigeneity and military security. Proponents claim that supporting the current degree of military presence on Oahu is an untenable position, for a few reasons.
The military economy and the economy of security, if you will, like who gets protected and who's vulnerable, is absolutely not equally distributed, and it creates inequalities. So the economic benefits flows to certain sectors, to certain individuals, certain companies, certain communities, and ethnic groups at the expense of others. And I would say that Native Hawaiians are the group that probably loses the most, has the greatest cost to bear, because it's their sovereignty and their land on which the military economy is based.
A direct result of this economic system is the militarization of Hawaii's resources, along with the byproducts of heavy industry. On Oahu, land, food, and water are all exceedingly finite. Utilizing these resources for defense renders them either unattainable or unusable for Hawaiians. Land and water once used to feed the island's residents is now used to make war.
Military training is highly destructive, especially when you're using live fire weapons. So places like Kaho'olawe, Makua Valley, Pohakuloa are littered with unexploded ordnance and other chemicals that come out of those munitions. So those lands could be contaminated for centuries. It's going to be very expensive to remediate. And they treat it as if it's a sacrifice area. But to Hawaiians, to people who live here, that's not acceptable. Those lands have to be restored. So really there's a high a debt that has to be paid back for reparations and the cleanup and restoration. Chemicals, contaminants are also part of it. So for example, I mentioned the Red Hill fuel spill. In 2021, 20,000 gallons of jet fuel spilled out of these giant tanks into the aquifer. Those tanks, 250 million gallons of jet fuel sits 100 feet over the Pearl Harbor aquifer, which supplies most of Honolulu's drinking water. So that fuel spill got into the Navy's water system and poisoned about 93,000 people's water. That was a wake-up call. Luckily, it didn't get to the 400,000 people that use the city's water system, but it led to a campaign that successfully shut down the Red Hill fuel tanks. So that's just an example of the kind of the stakes of this issue, is that it could be an existential threat to life on these islands. You talked about Pu'uloa becoming Pearl Harbor and the tremendous violence that that transformation entailed. What was once a food basket for this island, is now a giant Superfund site. Hundreds of individual sites within the Pearl Harbor complex alone. So, a place, it was, if you think of Pu'uloa and the kind of the food system, the biocultural food system that it represented, right? It was wetland agriculture, it was fish ponds, and it was a kind of this whole system, very sophisticated, manage the resources to just intensify production and feed lots of people. And now you can't eat anything from this place, right? That exemplifies, I think, the cost of the military.
In many ways, the military's first line of defense tends to be at the expense of outer territories. From the insidious threat of irreversible environmental degradation to a repeat of Pearl Harbor, living in Hawaii can feel like a ticking time bomb. To this day, Hawaii continues to be a premier target in any future global conflict. To members of the Hawaiian sovereignty movement, putting civilians at risk of attack in order to assert and promote a perceived military dominance isn't security. It instead creates a new norm of imposed paranoia. There's an exceptional recent example of this. On January 13th, 2018, all Hawaii residents received a notification that a nuclear missile was imminent. Thousands of people believed that certain death was approaching. It was communally understood that the enemy would never miss out on nuking Pearl Harbor's fleet. The civilians accepted that they were collateral damage and that this was the price of living alongside a naval powerhouse. People hid in storm drains, kissed their loved ones goodbye, and made calls to their families. This is an existential dread that the Hawaiian Islands should be entirely unaffiliated with. Yet under the guise of protection, military intervention has historically been implemented in territories nearest to global rivals. However, these efforts have largely backfired. Waving a big stick has proven to be a catalyst for increased military aggression rather than a deterrent.
Pearl Harbor is the example of that, where the U.S. militarizing this place and amassing the Pacific Fleet here became the trigger for Japan to want to attack because they felt that that was a threat to them. So this threat escalation happens, endangers those who live in those spaces, right? So I think, we get sacrificed. The places like Hawaii, Guam, Okinawa, Puerto Rico are used to create security for the United States, but is also the first place that they will sacrifice.
Gunfire and helicopters are heard routinely throughout many of the islands, grim reminders of civilians' inescapable proximity to war.
Even from my house, if it's pretty quiet, and I live in a cul-de-sac, it's pretty quiet, we can still hear the live fire training in Schofield.
Yet, the military operations carried out in Hawaii, primarily training exercises, could be performed at a much lower cost on the mainland. Military land is also cordoned off from the public and largely unproductive for surrounding communities.
From the Korean War on, it's been a constant expansion of military spending. And so you have the whole state becomes militarized in a sense, right? The whole federal budget and its operations and everything becomes a national security state. And that has had all kind of other negative consequences, I think, to from the starving of other programs that we need, healthcare, education, environment, you name it, social services, all starved, and the military budget continues to grow every year. So it's out of balance, and I think it puts people at risk.
The appropriation of resources inherent to the military economy turns cultural sites into traffic-plagued highways, jack-in-the-box, golf courses, and other contextually alien phenomena. Diverting governmental capital towards American ideals, specifically within education, agriculture, and land use, creates inequality via lowered usage of indigenous knowledge. This process leads to huge losses in culture, and although Hawaiian cultural preservation has been ramping up since the 70s, it's presently nowhere near where it should be to best benefit the average citizen.
The issue isn't with the person, it's with the institution, right? The institution itself has a long history, again, of violence against Native and Indigenous people. I remember what it was like being in school. We weren't taught to be Hawaiian. There was no Hawaiian culture class, right? That everything was geared towards getting us ready to be U.S. citizens, getting us ready to be American. This kind of rejection almost of Native knowledge and Indigenous knowledge of like, well, you folks, like your culture is dead, or maybe you folks aren't at the cultural preservation that maybe your ancestors once were. So therefore, we're just not going to really take your word for it. That's been the kind of ignorance for decades now, and now, unfortunately, we all in 2024 have to catch up. I'd agree that the system is kind of set up for maintaining non-Hawaiian control of lands, of capital, of wealth, all these different measures.
That's not to say that the system of military security has no individual benefits. However, these benefits are exclusively apportioned to active members of the armed forces, as well as veterans. This incentivizes economically unstable inhabitants of these territories to view enlistment as the only way out of poverty. This is why some of the most outspoken voices against militarism within the Hawaiian sovereignty movement are veterans themselves. To them, the military economy is an inequitable system.
Those who maybe want to see the sovereignty movement flourish also have a hand in the military.
Certainly the economic benefits are central. You know, it's mostly a military of poor people, which means it's a lot of people of color, and increasingly a lot of LGBTQ folks too, you know, and women. A lot of marginalized people find that that's the only way, for genuine security, to have housing, the military take care of it, to have food, the military take care of it, you know, to have health care, the military take care of it, right?
If you join us, we'll give a signing bonus, we'll guarantee your college education, you will be set for life. And those are really hard benefits to deny if you are in a low socioeconomic status.
In order to promote stewardship of the land while freeing citizens of the fear associated with militarization, a new system needs to be integrated, one of genuine security.
We need food. We need water. We need housing. We need education. We need proper environmental supports. That's what a proper advanced society looks like. We need supports for disabled people. You know, we cannot have all our disabled people, all our elders, locked away. We can have a society that's built on so much misery. So yeah, when we talk about genuine security, we talk about what makes life worth living and what are the indigenous values from wherever we're at, yeah, that guide us in proper stewardship of land, in proper relationship between the people of this generation and the ones to come. People can't thrive unless the land and the water are thriving, yeah, and that they have a proper relationship with, what's called the ecosystem, or in Hawaiian terms, with the ahopua, with ancestors. If they have that kind of ancestral relationship with land, or at least a notion of stewardship of the land and the water, and that's really absent in the way that we think as Americans, or like in American Western style thinking. Get curious about what kind of ordinary people think about demilitarization, and I'll tell you the best measure that I can point to you in terms of evidence of how our movement is building. If you look at some of the testimony from 2015, there was a similar conversation happening about the Army releasing some of its presence here, some of its land holdings and some of its troop presence, and there's all this testimony, and you're absolutely right. In 2015, it was kind of like a 50-50 thing, people making all of those jobs kind of arguments. This summer, the testimony on the leases, Ohakuloa, Makua, Pomoho, and Kahuku, about 20 hours worth of testimony, all of it's available on YouTube. I could be wrong, but I think it's about 98% Aloha Aina. 98%. So from 50 to like 98, that I track that as a major movement of the consciousness of people.
Aloha Aina, or love for the land, is a concept that directly clashes with the current scale of military presence of Oahu. With this shift in consciousness, it's apparent that Hawaii's native people and activists want genuine security. Nonetheless, state-level programs within the sphere are chronically underfunded. The Office of Hawaiian Affairs works to revitalize Native Hawaiian cultural practices, offering project funding, grants, and housing to Native Hawaiians. They operate using only 0.05% of the U.S.'s national military expenditure for 2024. Reapportioning the tiniest percentage of that enormous budget towards the Office of Hawaiian Affairs would holistically benefit the state. Greater funding would mean more targeted expenditure towards addressing food insecurity, housing insecurity, and cultural preservation. Combine this with future partial discharge and cleanup of leased lands, and it's certain that Oahu will feel very, very different for its people.
All these kind of cultural revitalizations too. I mean, you have language revitalization that really starts to take root in the early 80s. And so by this point, today in 2024, you've got at least maybe one or two generations of students from the very first preschools who are now having their own kids, some of them back to those schools, and so on and so forth. So yeah, I mean, it's been a decade, over a period of decades for us to get to this point. As with any kind of movement, I would say too.
People are restoring lo'ikalo, loko'ia fish ponds. They're trying to take back land, restore water to streams. Dozens and dozens of projects around the island.
There are people who are actively engaged in land restoration work, who for them, they're just like, I grow my own food, I take care of my own livestock, and this is it. No matter the outcome, there are people who, again, are reminding us of the cultural practices, of these traditional ways of life. Now we can hear it overhead too. Yeah, like we quite literally hear it. I think it's definitely military. Yeah. It's like right on cue. Yeah.
Go defend the fucking...
Yeah.
I don't know. What was it defending?
Yeah. Not defending anyone. It's not defending me, I'll tell you that.